Okay, so today we're going to talk about an issue that has been talked about many times in the past, but it's a very difficult topic because you get into the privacy versus security kind of debate. And I mean, it goes back to the old adage that those who would trade freedom for security deserve neither and will get neither. And that's not an exact quote, of course, I'm paraphrasing. But it's that general vibe again. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be part of an ongoing investigation into the FBI, Apple, the court system, and just a lot of the motives and connections that go with all of this, because there are some very dense court documents relating to this. And today I'm just going to cover just the general sense of what this case is entailing and just what Apple's trying to do to counteract the FBI's pushes on them and the court's pushes on them. So, in case you are unaware, the FBI recently unlocked the encrypted iPhone belonging to the man who ended the lives of 3 U.S. sailors on the Pensacola Naval Air Base last December. If you can't tell, I have to use certain speech to walk on eggshells here so this video doesn't get restricted. So there's a lot of buzzwords for YouTube that I can't use. So Attorney General Barr lashed out at Apple for not giving the FBI any assistance in this hacking of the iPhone, in breaking into it. So the real question is, should Apple have helped the FBI? So the issue is that when something like this happens, if Apple did help the FBI, it's very unclear what the precedent set is. So when you have a situation like this or a scenario like this, there's basically an infinite number of ways to interpret it. So what does it mean if Apple gave them access? So you have to ask, does Apple now help the FBI in any scenario whatsoever? Or is it only if somebody partook in ending somebody else's life? And how does that pertain to lesser crimes? So you can see how there's already a lot of questions about this. And even if Apple says one thing, I mean, it's not like they have to follow through with it necessarily. So there's a lot of loopholes or just non-legally binding forms of communication. So like if you look at, this is just an instance, if you look at Twitter, okay, if Apple helped the FBI and then they tweeted out something like, oh, well, you know, we gave the FBI access, but it sets the bar really, really low. You know, just don't be like this person who I can't mention on the stream. Just don't be like that person. Okay, like they could say that and it's not legally binding. So they can make their customer base think one thing and they can do something else. And you're going to see that a lot of this is likely rooted in deception, and you're going to see that more as I go through some of the legal issues with a lot of this. So of course, though, like with anything, I had to play devil's advocate, and I had to look at what the people were saying who were saying that Apple should have helped the FBI. And some of the issues were all pertaining to the same thing, even though they were labeled as different issues. And a lot of them, just before I go through some specific ones here, they just missed the point in general. They just completely subverted the actual purpose of not having Apple help the FBI. And you're going to see as I go through these that there's like an underlying issue that's present in all of these. So one of the big ones that I heard is that just because they hack into the guy's iPhone 5C doesn't mean that the FBI now has access to other iPhone models. And you see this recurring theme that people think that Apple gives the FBI just one thing, like they give them one piece of code to get into an iPhone rather than just helping them in general. But Apple will always have one thing to break into an iPhone. So now they're assuming that Apple should help the FBI because, well, they're just helping them with one iPhone. Yeah, but what about all the other iPhones that Apple can also break into? And what about the fact that, I'm going to get to encryption here in a minute, encryption is ubiquitous. Either everything is encrypted or nothing is encrypted. There is no in between. And so you're going to see here that the FBI really wanted Apple to customize an operating system for the iPhones so that the FBI now had a backdoor to break into the iPhone. So the FBI, this was another issue for people, or another point made for people who think that Apple should have helped the FBI. The FBI needs a warrant and a court order to break into an iPhone even if Apple helps them. Yes, but you're still subverting the fact that Apple's a private company. They're not a telecommunication provider. So they don't fall under, I think it's called the All Writs Act. I'll get into that in a little bit here. They don't fall into that category. So you're going to have a court ordering something that the FBI can't do legally anyways. So they miss that point. And this is also, people will say, this is a unique case where patriotism trumps privacy because there are other bad men out there who are supposedly connected to the events at the Pensacola Naval Air Base. So again, we see that they're just kind of ignoring the slippery slope argument here. They're ignoring the fact that if Apple helps the FBI once, again, what precedent is set? And that's kind of the big issue with a lot of this is every single point, and it's not like I've scoured the entire internet, okay? But the articles that I've read, which there's at least one link down below in the description, in the sources link, excuse me. Every single point that I've read misses the fact of the precedent that's set. And that's the issue here. And I would say, you know, okay, if the precedent set is not going to move, it's going to be stuck in stone, which it won't be. Like, that's physically impossible. You can't do that. But if, theoretically, you could take the precedent set and keep it in stone and just say, hey, don't end people's lives and we won't break into your iPhone to see what else you were up to and to help the FBI and other law enforcement. If that's the precedent set and it's not moving, it's like, okay, I think people will generally agree like that's okay. The problem is that that's not where it stops. And I've already been through it a couple times, but another thing here to think about, which I think I've mentioned in past videos, is if you go through a lot of the court documents, by the way, it becomes very obvious that Apple is actually resisting the FBI. They're actually resisting the court system and the court's mandates. They're actually going against it. But we can't get around the fact that Apple has to publicly resist. They have to put on this face like they're resisting. And it doesn't mean that they don't privately help in some way, even if it's through a third party or any other means. I mean, at this point, it's like, you know, what can you think of that Apple could possibly use to publicly show that they're resisting the FBI, but at the same time circumvent a lot of that and help the FBI under cover of darkness? And again, I've briefly looked through some of the court documents. This is why I say it's an ongoing investigation on this channel, is just because there is a lot to cover, but it doesn't seem to me like Apple is going to actually try to help the FBI out of the public eye. It seems like they're actually resisting. So let's look a little bit at the legal history of Apple and the FBI, because this actually goes back to December of 2015 in San Bernardino, California. And I'm sure that many of you already understand what that is. So we're going to look at Apple versus the FBI. So the San Bernardino Health Department owned the iPhone that the guy had. So the FBI wanted the court to order Apple to help them in breaking into the iPhone. But because Apple says publicly that they have no way of accessing the encrypted data, the FBI wanted the court to order them to create an operating system that would disable key security features on the iPhone, and it would provide the FBI with a backdoor, like I've mentioned before. And I've discussed all of this before, but given what's going on now, it's worth discussing in a bit more depth. So the court ended up ordering Apple to create and install the custom operating system but Apple publicly refused on the grounds that it's unlawful and unconstitutional, which it is. It would compromise all Apple devices and it would set a dangerous precedent. So this goes back to the encryption argument. So in other words, encryption is ubiquitous. You either have everything encrypted or nothing is encrypted. So here's what looks generally good for Apple, okay? The fact that they went to court with this showed that it was necessary to force them to comply. I mean, Apple could have gotten the court order and they could have told the people that there's nothing else that they can really do. They got a court order. They have to help the FBI, but they didn't. They refused to help the FBI. They refused the court order. So the other thing is that you have to look at the fact that there is a whole market created by the fact that a company like Apple does not help the FBI. They don't help them break into their own devices. And you can look at the market that's massive on the dark web for code breakers. And their main customer is governments, world governments. And that should tell you something about how these technology companies, while they might offer some assistance to something like the NSA or the CIA or the FBI, they're not necessarily giving them access to just anyone's iPhone. And there is a difference. There is a massive difference between the device manufacturer and a telecommunication provider. Okay, so there's a difference between Apple and Verizon or AT&T. There's a big difference. And AT&T, anyways, you can already go into their history and look at Bell Labs and DARPA and all that. I'm not going down that rabbit hole now. But regardless, look at the telecommunication providers, look at the history that some of them have with the government, and then look at the fact that we're going to get to a law here really soon that shows that the telecommunication providers actually have to help the FBI, so, and other law enforcement agencies. So we're going to talk here about the All Writs Act from 1789. This authorizes federal courts to issue all writs necessary or appropriate in aid of their respective jurisdictions and agreeable to the usages and principles of the law. So what this means is basically that if there's not something on the books expressly prohibiting the FBI from doing something, the courts can make it legal, but they can't take something that the FBI's never been able to do and make it so that they can do it. I'll explain that a little bit more here as I go on. There's an example I'll give. But the All Writs Act, you can see here, first enacted in 1789, and on which the government bases its entire case, does not give the district court a roving commission to conscript and commandeer Apple in this manner. So this is basically just, like I said, talking about how even with the All Writs Act, it's not like the court can actually force Apple to do anything because Apple's a device manufacturer. So to run down here what we've covered for the most part so far. So the FBI wants to order Apple to make a product for them. That would be the custom operating system with the backdoor that the FBI can then use to get into the iPhones. It would be designed to the FBI's specifications, and it would have to meet Apple's quality standards. The software, too, would have to be designed in a way for criminal defendants to exercise their right to dispute the government's legal claims. So there's a very specific way that this operating software has to be created, and they can't force Apple to plunge money into a project just to help the FBI. They can't legally force Apple to do that. So Bill Clinton signed in 1994 the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. And it was basically because the FBI's wiretapping abilities were rendered fairly useless and in some cases unlawful against digital telephone switches. So Clinton signed this act to make it lawful. And this act outlines the circumstances in which a private company must assist law enforcement with electronic surveillance. So well, it's abbreviated CALEA, CALEA, only applies to telecommunication companies, not device manufacturers. So even under CALEA, Apple would need to possess the information to decrypt the data. And the FBI can ask for that, but they can't demand it. And by the way, Apple does not possess the information to decrypt the data. They possess the information to weaken the iPhone's operating system or install a new weak operating system and break in that way. But they can't directly decrypt the data. So the All Writs Act, like I was talking about before, basically says that if there's no law specifically forbidding the FBI to compel Apple to design a custom operating system, a court can force Apple to do it. But the FBI is trying to do something outside of their legal confines. So this is where the All Writs Act does not comply. It doesn't apply to this situation. So basically, to summarize that, when you have a company like Apple, okay, that is looking to, or when you have law enforcement looking to garner the help of a private company, a court can force the company to help Apple. But the FBI is trying to break into an iPhone. They're trying to violate constitutional rights that they can't already violate. So it's like if they want to do X and the court wants this company to help them do X, X has to already be legal. It has to already be something that they can legally do. The court can't write into the law that the intel agencies can now do X and then force a company to do it, to help them. So I hope that makes sense. It is a little bit dense. I did link down in the description, more articles describing this All Writs Act and the CALEA. I did link all that. So if you do want to go check it out, feel free to go do that. So where does this all go from here? Well, it's like I said, this is an ongoing investigation. It's something that I'm going to continue looking into. I have my researcher looking into, and there's a lot more to say on all of this. So one thing that I will say here to end this is that Five Eyes routinely uses allies in their organization, in their little communal group, to spy on citizens of other nations. So this is like when this is like when MI6 spies on U.S. citizens for the U.S. government or for the U.S. intel agencies, and the U.S. intel agencies spy on British citizens for the British intel agencies. So an intel agency might break into a phone with something that they have, and then they would pay some third party to make it look like this third party broke in. And it's really just so that the public doesn't know what a certain intel agency is able to do. And it's also so that it keeps their hands clean, because you can't have, for this to function, and for the intel agency conglomerate to function, they have to operate in a lot of ways out of the view of the public. They can't have the public knowing that, oh, well, okay, the British intel agencies spy on American citizens, Americans spy on British citizens, and then they just swap info. Because once that's known, all of a sudden people get very sketchy about their own intel agencies, as they should be. But for the intel agencies to continue to operate, they can't necessarily have that be public, or at least broadcasted to the masses. And it helps that, Operation Mockingbird, they control a lot of the mainstream media, a lot of what the masses watch, a lot of the mainstream mindset. So it makes it difficult to, it makes it really difficult to get the truth out there and to get the masses to open their eyes to a lot of this stuff. And so, like I said, I'm going to keep talking about this at some point, and this is going to be ongoing, because there's a lot that's going on, and there's a lot that the DOJ is trying to do, and there's reason to believe that it goes deeper than the DOJ, and the DOJ is simply being used as a tool for something deeper. We'll get into all of that in another video, but I just wanted to share my thoughts, my ideas on this, and then get into some of the laws that pertain to this and explain this a little bit, because I do think that it's very easy to say, oh, you know, this terrible thing just happened. Now we need the Patriot Act because we have to catch all of these people who could, you know, hurt America or, you know, whatever country you're in. I mean, I know my audience is mostly American, but it's very easy to turn over some of your liberty for security when you're afraid. That's why this whole, I don't even want to say it, this whole thing going on right now that the mainstream's just talking about, that the whole reason we're in lockdowns and whatnot, okay, people are afraid. And that's why they're using this as an opportunity to end encryption, why they're using this as an opportunity to push certain things along, like contact tracing and the mandatory vaccines and all of this. It's why they're trying to push this along now, because people are terrified. Or at least the masses are terrified. So it's the same thing with this, where something big happens and they use it as a catalyst to push these other things through. And this is exactly what's going to happen if there's another incident, which it's surely going to pop up eventually, where some terrible person does something and now the FBI wants access to their iPhone, and now Apple's like, we don't want to help you. And the FBI is like, well, we got a court order saying that you have to help us. And again, we go back to the fact that if the law is not already on the books, the All Writs Act doesn't, they can't force a company to comply with the FBI. And so all that they have to do is put that on the books so that the FBI can legally do it. And then they can force companies to adhere to it. So you see how all this works? This gets really sketchy, and it's a bit tangled. But as I do more videos on this and I explain this a bit more, I think people will start to see maybe a bit of where this is all going. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I just wanted to get on here, talk about this a little bit. I know that it's a topic that it's talked about from time to time, but I usually try to put it in the larger picture of, you know, the surveillance state in general. But I mean, just the fact that this is news from just very recently, I think that it's worth talking about again. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Of course, I always appreciate the support. If you haven't checked out the website yet, it's shieldstrm.com. It's shieldstrm.com. There's a link down in the description. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.